Five, four, three, two, one. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us in what will be our last session for this most meaningful series that Aliza and I were lucky enough to embark on. And today is no exception. We are here with the incredible Nina Hurd-Garis, who is, I'd like you to tell everybody what it is that you do, actually. I was lucky enough to meet you through the television on the Sesame Street Town Hall on CNN, which was just so incredible. I actually saw it twice, once by myself and then once with my children. But you work with the American Academy of Pediatrics, and that was what gave me the light bulb to see if you would speak with us. But please, will you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Oh, well, first, I'm so honored to be here with you and with everyone watching. It's like such a great time to be having these kind of hard conversations, and thank you for being the conduit to letting us have this conversation. So I'm a pediatrician and also a researcher, and probably more importantly than that, a mom to a Black son. So I come to this work really with an academic hat on, with a clinical hat on, but also with a personal hat on too, because I want the world to be better for him and better for all of our kids. So I really just bring such a passion and a desire to talk to you, talk to anyone who will listen. I will shout on the rooftops to help make this world better. So thanks again for having me.
That's funny. I too feel that way. Like, I'll talk to anyone who listen. And I always speak, and Aliza and I have spoken about this, that when she does her videos for Raising Good Humans, or I do videos on my Instagram, which is just my preferred platform, I think no one will ever see them. No one will ever. I just want to speak. Maybe I would like to connect with people, but I assume. But Aliza, please reintroduce yourself for the umpteenth time, if you don't mind.
Hi, I'm Dr. Aliza Pressman. I'm a developmental psychologist and the co-founder of the Mount Sinai Parenting Center. And yes, I have a podcast called Raising Good Humans and Seedlings Group. So I'm very excited to be here too, and to meet you, Nia, who I feel like I know you because I watched you on Town Hall twice as well.
Well, and in your work at Seedlings, Mount Sinai, Raising Good Humans, all the work that I hear you do, collaborate with you on, and also study from you, Aliza, you are always referencing the American Academy of Pediatrics. It's like, something in your fact, data, research-based arsenal of information that you have, that obviously is a very safe and trusted entity and institution, which is why when Nia came on CNN and said that's where she is also working and affiliated, I was immediately associated with hearing, American Academy of Pediatrics. And we've wanted to talk so much about how we as parents, and that really is the avenue we've been on this whole time, is just us as parents as a whole, if anybody is ever out there listening or watching, but where we tried to intentionally start this conversation, which I think we are all asked to do right now, and to rise to that occasion, no matter how uncomfortable or insecure you are about it. Put one foot in front of the other. And if you are an overly respectful person like me, it is terrifying to do, because you just want to be quiet and respectful and learn. But part of learning is asking, as well as listening, but definitely listening. So with such great humility, we have wanted to take you said it yourself, your most important job is being a parent. And when you sign up for that job, everything changes. All of a sudden you're inside out. Your organs are on the outside, and every decision you make and every emotion you have, whether you're at a bookstore worried you're away from them and you feel guilty, or they have a fever, or you're going through something in a relationship with someone, or the family dynamic, or a medical issue, a behavioral issue, it doesn't matter. The stakes are never higher than that of with your children. And so as we enter this most important phase of having this be an open and necessary conversation, there are a lot of things happening right now, a lot of anxieties, if you will, with the race conversation, with coronavirus, with school not being available, therefore food not being available, parents working from home or unemployed. The list is very rare to have this many crises happening at the same time. The anxiety that comes from that as a parent, I'm wondering, because you two are so smart when it comes to this, how do we regulate ourselves as parents to even cope, to show our children how to cope, whether that's an action or reaction? How do adults and children experience anxiety differently? And knowing that, how can we go into it to calm ourselves, to center ourselves, if you will, and then empower our children with everything they need to have empowerment with right now?
I'm so glad you asked that question, Drew, because I think many of us just jump into the conversation 2 feet forward and not really take that time to think and sit and reflect. But it is so important. It is so important for us to check in with ourselves first. Like we say, put on your oxygen mask first before you attempt to put someone else's on. It is critical and probably even more important in this context, in this conversation. And, I think honestly, part of showing your kids and modeling how to deal with stress and anxiety is your attitude, your behavior, how you deal with stress and anxiety. You're showing them, not verbally saying, but indirectly in your nonverbal kind of attitude, your nonverbal behavior to how you're dealing with your stress and anxiety. And I think one of the mistakes I made as a parent is not being honest about how I was feeling and how I was doing with my child. And I think that was hard. So during coronavirus, all of this stuff's happening. My son's being homeschooled. He's not seeing his friends. All of this stuff's going on. And he says, I'm having such a tough time. He's crying, he's doing all this stuff. And he said, but you're doing okay. How are you doing okay? And I'm like, oh my God, I am not okay. I'm also stressed and struggling in it. And it's hard for me too. And I think that's one of the lessons I learned from at least the coronavirus is to make sure that I am telling my son, you know what, it's hard for me too. And here's what I'm doing to make myself feel better. I'm running, I'm spending more time with you, I'm making sure I'm praying or doing whatever it is that feeds my soul so that he can then, when he's feeling stressed, he knows, okay, these are the things that help me to feel better. But I love to hear
I do feel like there is a medical and spiritual, religious aspect to, Aliza, you've put out videos that have been such an invitation to me as a parent to process the anxiety differently.
I'm in the same boat, so I feel the same way. And one of the things that I try to remember, because we have to remind ourselves all the time, is that we're on heightened stress response. We're just like, ah. And when your brain goes into this, like the alarm bells are going, there is a huge threat, and there really is one or two massive threats. We have this double pandemic. It's important to take a minute to say, wait a second, I have this fully developed prefrontal cortex that knows how to navigate stress, and I can't even figure out what in the world I'm doing right now. So I need to take a breath, accept that, and then we operate from like, wait a second, okay, See, I need to do it right now too. Now I can be open to my child. And I think what Nia's saying, it's so true. We also need to share with our children, oh, by the way, honey, your brain is actually still developing. You won't even have the capacity to manage all of this until you're in your 20s, because that's just not where your brain is. So I'm here to help, and here are some ideas. And this is what I do for myself. I mean, I love that you shared with your son, here are the things that I do to feed my soul, to make sure that I can get through this difficult time. And it's not to take it away. There's no chance that it would be inappropriate, actually, to be like, it's good. All's good. It would mean that
I'm really fine now. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So what's better is to say, this is a really, really crazy, unimaginably difficult time, but I know we can get through this.
That's right.
And then we sit with our kids in that space versus, oh no, it's fine, and you're going to be fine. And because then you start to think, is everybody fine and I'm just crazy?
Right.
But nobody's fine right now. There's a lot going on. I'm raising 2 daughters, so it's very different, and 2 white daughters. So the stress level is high, but it's not, I don't have a black son. That's got to be a whole other layer of unimaginable stress.
But now we are looking at everything different.
Yeah.
And it isn't about, I feel like we have so much work to do. I always believed in so much optimism too. And until 2020, I was like, optimism is my survival tactic. It lives within me, maracas. And all of a sudden, I'm like, that just doesn't feel right. Intelligent optimism, this proactive, as you said, Aliza, this is such a crazy time, but we'll get through it. It's like, it's such a crazy time. Here's how we're going to get through it. Here's, and thrive. I don't know about coronavirus because I'm not a very scientifically minded person. Maybe that I feel like we've got to get through, but the race is something that is so completely different. I know that it all can cause a lot of need for figuring out how we manage all of this, but they seem like such different things, obviously. And that was why I was curious on a spiritual, religious, scientific, medical level of how we center ourselves in order to approach all that needs to be done.
Right. I mean, I too am an optimistic person. I'm like, glass is overflowing. And I will say, and I hope we get into this a little later too, that I am still optimistic. It feels different to me, like this moment in time feels different. But I do think our optimism needs to be coupled with action, right? And I think it's in that action, the doing of the work, that some of the joy can come through all the pain and all the hard and all the stress. At least as I see it, I still am optimistic, but I'm not putting the work over there. I'm optimistic while doing the work, and I hope others feel the same. Like, does that make sense? Like feeling
that so resonates, because it also feels like, how can we take action? We have to get ourselves into a place where we go, like, I always say, like, I'm not being chased by a bear, meaning like in this exact moment, my stress does not have to think like it's this moment where we go into that fight, flight, or freeze. If we can get ourselves out of it for a second, we can really take action and make this, be optimistically active.
Right.
So I feel so the same way.
That to me is everything as a parent, as a human, is to take myself into a rational state of mind. And I've always struggled with that word, overwhelmed. I just feel like, then get out from under it. Like, don't be overwhelmed. But it also is one of the best words to describe when you just feel like you're being squashed by all that is happening, and I want to have empathy towards that word and not so much impatience with it. Because it does describe a feeling, but I feel like it's a feeling you can't sit with too long. You have to figure your way out time and time again. And that's me as an adult rationalizing this. How do children process feeling overwhelmed?
Do you want? You go for it. Go for it.
Well, I would say they look to us to co-regulate because they don't have all the tools. They don't have all the, what's a good word that I'm looking for? The house isn't fully built yet.
Right.
So
you're still working on it.
Yes. So that's where we come in and we kind of co-regulate with them so they can borrow some of what we have to get through this. And again, it doesn't mean like we have to just keep a smile on our face, but just using those tools to get ourselves into a place where we can sort of respond to the world instead of react without thinking will help them over time. Because right now, you're absolutely right. Kids do have a different way of handling stress because they just don't have a background or history. Like we get to say, okay, we've lived many decades. We've lived many decades and can look to those experiences that we've had, for better or for worse, to know we're going to get through this and that there are certain things that we can do that will help us get there. And so then we can share that with them. Not just verbally.
I so agree with that.
Like you were saying,
Yeah.
Even your physical, your body, your nonverbal.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with that because I think as parents, we're our child's first like filter of the world, right? And so that's even more the reason why it's important for us to check how we're feeling and to really, make sure we're doing the things that feed our soul, because they're going to see that and feed off of our anxiety, and sometimes makes it worse for them. And so I agree with you. It's like just trying really, really hard to be there for them and help them name some of their emotions that they're feeling, because sometimes it's hard. Like they're just getting stressed and are angry and irritable just like we are, and are not sleeping as well, not eating as well, and missing their friend, like everything. And so just naming some of those feelings is a first step in saying, oh, okay, I'm feeling frustrated, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling sad, because then you can start to work on some of those emotions. But it's so hard as a kid. It's just like everything is happening to you right now, and it feels like you have no control over any of it. And that's scary. That's scary for us. So
and
I totally agree with you.
When you have a dual path situation for kids to deal with, like coronavirus and race, although they are completely separate, should they be kept separate in subject for clarity for kids developing? And that could be we could talk about from the 3, 4, 5 age up until 12 to 16 age. And obviously they need different approaches. But is it wiser to compartmentalize some of the information for younger children so that they can process things differently? Or is the world just going to tell them everything that's happening and they're going to have to deal with it in a weird way, the same way an adult is not given compartmentalized information? How do we approach that?
My researcher hat on is like their favorite answer. Researchers are, it depends. And I think that's actually true in this case. I think it just depends on so many things. How old your child is, how much they can understand. I would say for older kids, let's say teenage kids, coronavirus and racism is so interrelated that I think it makes sense to have the conversation, because it shows one of the truest manifestations of how racism operates. Okay, racism operates with respect to the coronaviruses. We are seeing more Black and brown people die because they have the jobs that are requiring them to be out in public. They, are unfortunately in places where they're not able to social distance as frequently because of the manifestations of racism. So you can have like such a an important kind of higher level conversation with a teen, especially when they're asking all those questions and you're able to dialogue. But for a younger kid, it's probably a lot. It's probably a lot to try to put them both together. But I don't know. What do you think, Dr. Pressman?
I completely agree. I mean, the older, it depends, everything you said. I to add to that. I think the younger kids, and I would love to hear more from you about your research on, how we talk about these really intense, violent conversations when we're dealing with children who may be exposed, and what that does to the community, what that does to the individual child. I think that is, and I know that a lot of your research looks into that. So I would love to hear, because I agree with everything you're saying.
And the reason I ask is because my 7-year-old saw a protest sign that said, "I can't breathe." And she said, "No, you can breathe through a mask."
Oh.
And I just
Yeah.
thought, here's where we start to understand. And it took me a moment to decide what and how I was going to start that conversation with her. And that was at the very beginning. That was right when it happened. Now we've had a lot of rich discussions, and we're in a very different place. But in that moment was when I was going through age and figuring out how I was going to approach that.
And that's hard, because I think you do still, as you being the parent, still have to decide what's best for them, right? And I think sometimes it's not saying everything, right? Like telling them everything. I think one of the things I've learned, though, is that kids do overhear. Kids do find out certain things. So you still want to be honest. You want to be honest in the information. In that case, it seems a little bit different, but in other cases, for example, you would want to know like what they know about that. Like if she saw that sign and alluded to something else, you might want to probe. Like, okay, yeah, what do you think that means? So that you can kind of meet them where they are. I made the mistake one day of having an interview, like kind of a pretty heavy interview in the car. I was going to work and I was trying to just like get to work on time, but my son was in the car. And I usually am really good. Like I never do kind of these hard conversations where I can't actually talk to him in the midst of it, but I just like the timing didn't work out. And so at the end of the conversation, then he starts to ask me questions because I talked about, Black men being pulled over and all this stuff. And he had heard some of that before, but really I was talking about my brother and my dad, so it was really personal for him. And so then that springboarded into a whole bunch of other kind of conversations. But I say that to say, I see my first job as like protecting him. I still want to tell him about the ills of the world, and we will get all the way there when he's older. But my first job is to make sure that he feels safe. And then start to talk about the bigger things in life. And I think in that situation, you were just in a really tough situation with your daughter, but you get to decide. And I don't think that means you hold everything from her forever, right? But you don't have to say in that moment, especially if she's vulnerable, if she's already stressed, if she's already tired, all the things going on, the whole weight of the world. I do think it's an important conversation, obviously, that's why we're having it, but I don't think it always has to be right then.
I thought it was an interesting moment because it was the perfect example of we can't control how we give information as parents. And her school also just explained everything in real time with what happened with George Floyd. So I was very grateful because it came from where they see an institution of safety and education. So it coming from them to me was, I felt very fortunate because then I was able to continue the conversation, and I felt like I wasn't, overwhelming her with the information. She was getting it from what she associates with a place of safety and education. So I was able to handle that moment in a way that felt good, because I knew she was equipped with certain things and I was able to put it together for her in that moment.
It
Um,
also seems like if you and I want to echo because I thought it was such an important point. Asking kids, tell me what you think or tell me what you know first, really gives you a space to take a breath and figure out what you're going to do. But just buys you time. But also you get to see, okay, this is where they are, because sometimes they're just not at all where we think they are. And the other thing is, we don't have to be afraid to say, that is a really, really good question. And I need to think about it for a little bit. And then I am going to get back to you. Or, and to say, I'm glad you asked, and always ask me questions. Like those points, just making sure that keeps this dialogue open for years. Because this is certainly not, I wish this was one conversation. I think we all wish it was a quick conversation and then boom, the world is better. But yeah.
but I think, Nia, something I heard you say is that one of the things that's so important in the approach is that proactiveness in the moment, what we can do rather than just the information. And I feel like that's where the optimist in me kicks in and goes, okay, that's intelligent optimism. That is, if you lead or finish with hope, either, both, one, there has to be that. And I'm wondering if this is the case for children from two absolute in the know professionals. I believe for myself, for my own one foot in front of the other, that I have to keep believing, not in a ethereal way, in a very grounded, like Earth's crust, that deep kind of way, grounded, that there is optimistic, actionable, proactive capability for my part in change, knowing my infinitesimal place in the universe. And how do you, that wording with children, I find so important. Is there any advice you have for the can-do aspect of the realities of everything?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think because you want to give real information, right? You don't want to, especially for the older kids, sugarcoat things too much, right? But if you leave it with the sadness and the kind of despair, you can feel, you and your child can feel hopeless and helpless, right? Like there's nothing I can do. This problem is so big and so great. And that is true. The problem is so great. It's pervasive and it's persistent. It's been going on for a long time. It's not going to change tomorrow. But if you leave it there, then you don't allow them the opportunity to get their creative juices flowing, to think about what can they do in their sphere of influence, right? What can they do? And I think that's where you get to see the like real magic of this generation, because I think kids are so uninhibited in many ways, right? When we come up with like solutions to oh, that won't work, this won't work, because we have all these blocks and all this past history. But kids can be creative and imaginative and think of ways that they can influence the world, right? So that might mean they could like read a book, read a book to some of their friends and do a book club. That might mean they might make a sign. That might mean they write a letter, whatever that is. I think if you just leave it on how terrible things are, you don't allow them to really be able to sit with where they fit, right? Where they fit in the universe and how they can actually make a difference. Because the reality is, all throughout history, there have been people that have been pushing for change, right? They didn't stop there. They let that hope push them forward. And I think we have to end there, or otherwise, like, what a sad reality. I mean, I refuse to end in despair and helplessness.
I do really want to get it right so that this generation, as well as us who have the capacity to change things, I I always believe in what we are doing when we are taking care of each other. I just guess that's where my silly optimism always takes me, is that belief. And I don't tell myself it. It's that it cannot be extinguished. And I sometimes say, look to history to learn lessons, and history on race is the most difficult. What do we tell children to believe it will become different from now on, that it is in their hands?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen progress in every generation, right? It hasn't been a quantum leap, and it's been progress. And I think what we're hoping for is not an inch. We're hoping for big progress. And what that requires to me is radical thinking, radical change. And at the precipice of every movement has been young people, right? Like even in the most recent movements with gun, being thoughtful around gun ownership. Young people have been on the forefront of that. Electing our leaders, certain leaders, young people have been on the forefront of that. So I think, I feel hopeful that every generation has thought leaders and people that are willing to do the hard work and the radical thinking to move us forward.
And
I
to
don't know.
think about the milestones that have occurred and that they need to be taken farther, because everything you were saying started to rise in me. Your words, your facial expressions, your energy, which, by the way, I noticed on the CNN town hall, you had a light in your eyes and a smile on your face as you spoke about the most difficult conversation. And to me, cadence and energy and intention and the way you convey is immeasurably important, and might be the difference between someone accepting it or even being open to it, let alone hearing it, feeling it, and letting it envelop them. I don't think it's easy to be open-minded and hearted with righteousness. It is.
Yeah.
It is. You may already have your righteousness, and then you're both backs to each other, and it's not getting anywhere. So the kindness and openness as we guide. But what you just said was so hopeful and changed something medically and spiritually and physically in me. Because it just, you're right. The way that young people feel like they have that invincibility.
Yeah.
Sometimes us adults are like, oh, those kids, they think they're invincible. And it's like, well, no, damn right. That's exactly what's going to foster the change. So I love what you said. And it burned the fires of hope bright in me. And I'm so honored and thrilled that you were able to talk to us today. And I'm so glad you did that town hall, and so glad I got to meet you through the television and then see you here. It's just amazing the way the world works, and thank you for letting us ask you to come and talk to us today.
Thank you.
Totally my honor. Have me back anytime.
Good. Okay, good. I would love this. I feel like all of these are leading to longer friendships, and I'm not very good at like casual, like topical stuff. I like to get in there and like embed myself like a tick and just, have ongoing, meaningful collaborations for life. So
I love it. I'm game for sure.
Okay. Good. Oh, Nia, thank you so much. Thank you. And Delisa, thank you for taking this amongst many of our journeys together. And we'll be back in July with more important discussions. And this has been an extraordinary month, and I'm humbled to the core of my being. thank you, everyone who may or may not ever participate in this. I think trying to be a good person and a good parent, probably parent first, good person second, although you need that to be a good parent. So they're probably synonymous and number one priority, but how we raise the generation Nia speaks of to bring about that change that we also desire. Thank you.
I'm honored. Thank you.
Guys. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.